Let me just share this. So I have my thing on ESU because I don't have my computer that I like use at U of T. But I mean, this is essentially like what I had. But like one thing about like applications, I think like every school has like their own like requirements in terms of size and page and like all that stuff, and that like changes like how you're gonna like represent your work and everything just based on those limitations. So this one I think is like basically all of the ones I've made like merged into one, and essentially the one that I would have considered like my work portfolio. So like if I'm applying to things, I didn't end up applying anywhere because I got into GSAPP, and it says here like the other schools I got into, but yeah, so I applied to 9 schools in total and got into 6, I think. 3 of them were in Canada, McGill, U of T, and UBC, and I didn't get into McGill. And then the other 6 were in America. And I didn't get into the good schools, MIT, Harvard, and Yale, but I got into Berkeley, Penn, and GSAPP. And GSAPP was my first choice, so I came here. But so yeah, like I said, this portfolio is kind of like a conglomerate of like all the other ones. Like I have my UC Berkeley one, and it's like this, but like in 8 pages, because I think the limit was like 8 MB, which is really crazy. Usually though, I mean, I feel like portfolios generally go from like 30 to 50 pages, and this one is like just under that, or just in between 32 pages. But yeah, this one, I'll open it now, but it starts with this like kind of introduction, but that's what I mean by like the work portfolio. Like this isn't something that I had in my actual application, because I had like, you have like the CV and everything that your letter of admission, whatever, that you write this all in, but that's essentially like what I had. But the next page would have been like my like table of contents, and I have 8 projects here, but I'm pretty sure the last 2 projects in this were kind of like additions that I didn't include in most of my graduate applications, just because they were more like, if you see them like 7 and 8, they're like social experiments. Like it was whatever. But essentially it was like 6 projects. I would say like 5 to 6 projects, 4 to 6 are probably good enough, because you want to like really emphasize like the drawings and the story you're trying to tell, which is another thing I wanted to mention, is like something that you don't really hear from portfolio reviews until you're like in grad school, is like you should have like a essentially like a story, or like some kind of like common like the thread that like kind of weaves all your projects together to kind of create this like narrative in a way. But that can be really hard coming out of undergrad, because you have like a really strict like curriculum with like ARC 201 and whatever, all the studios that you have, JAV 101, and so it's very like prescriptive in that sense. But if there's a way where like you can kind of like morph all of the projects, kind of like Book Tower, you asked the question to the first presenter, like, did you change, like how much did you have to work on your drawings to make sure it like kind of fits this portfolio? I think like that has a lot to do with this like narrative. Like, how do you want your projects to be represented in a way that like it kind of is cohesive as like this whole book, because it's your work. You really want to show that you care, and I think that also like just ties everything together. So anyway, the first project I have is called like the Tetris House. So this was like, I think, so I actually didn't do my thesis. I didn't get into thesis in my last year, and that was the first year they were offered that like that thing, and like we were like basically guinea pig year. So when I enrolled, it was like, okay, we're gonna have this like comprehensive thing, and in second year you have to apply to design, tech, and blah blah blah. So that was like completely new. So I got into design, thankfully, because then I could do studio, and I didn't want to do tech or history. So that was really great. So I got to do the studio with Chloe Town, who is a really great professor. And yeah, so the work, I mean, I think this class is still a thing. So I think it makes sense. Like, you have the 2 inhabitants and all. So I the way I tried to like organize and lay out my portfolio was just like, I really wanted to emphasize like the drawing itself. And I feel like a lot of times portfolios can be kind of cluttered in a way. It's like, you don't need as many like kind of like what in the last portfolio you guys just saw, like you don't need to have like plans and sections, because you're going to learn that. But if you do, then you should kind of like have it in a way that is very clear and cohesive and like clean, because at the end of the day it is an aesthetic thing. Like, you're not just like showing this so that it's going to be built, you're showing this so that you can get into the school. So keeping that in mind, I feel like, is important. So like I had the layout was just like kind of having the title and then like a little blurb describing it, and like Inge kind of said, like, don't be afraid to use words. Like, words are important, but also like make sure you are being really thoughtful about those words, because I mean, yeah, sure, like they might not read it, but like if they do, you don't want to like sound like a fool. So I would definitely say make sure you're like very just remember that it's important to have them, but that it's like meaningful. So in the next page, I kind of like, again, like the thing about models, make sure you take photos of your models. And if it's a case where like they don't turn out like portfolio worthy, like just go into Photoshop. The best thing you can do is at least like have them kind of like floating in space if they're not in context, or like kind of, I would say like even going back to this, if I were to go back to this project, I would like go into Photoshop and like really like layer up a lot of the media. Like, I mean, I had a rhino model and I had these pictures, like it would have been worth it to maybe like have this in context model be like overlaid with a line drawing or like collaging that. Like, I think that's like something that's important, and it lets you like kind of merge a lot of your material together to have this like really nice image. So I feel like that could have happened here, where maybe those line drawings collaged above could have been like kind of overlaid on these model images, and that could have like been a page on its own, and that could have been like really interesting and like compelling because it's different and you're like using different layers and it's multimedia, etc. So that kind of thing. And also one thing to note is just like having captions. Like I just made sure that any of the models, any of the kind of real life things that were there, I had like the size of it, because scale is important. I mean, like this thing was pretty small, but like if it was bigger, then I would want to make sure that the people looking at this know that, because then it's like there's more material, more work, more labor, all that kind of thing. So yeah, just a reminder, just like to make sure you have captions, like this one, even just like interior render, just so that it's like, it kind of gives that context a little bit. So like starting with the render, just the general overview of the project, explaining like who the inhabitants are, moving to like kind of this like spatial study of like form finding and like where this is coming from in context, and then like to this more like technical part where, so like laying out these technical drawings can be hard because you just have all these like images and they're usually like, you know, set on like a certain page and all this. So it's going to be a lot of like InDesign work and like bringing in your drawings and like laying it out differently so that it fits like your page constraints. The page constraints I used were like I used a square page. My portfolio now is like 8.5 by 11. I think it doesn't really matter. I mean, again, it depends on like what the school asks for. Like some of them require it to be 8.5 by 11, or they don't care. I think most of them I kept the square, but if I had to change it, I just like fixed it a little bit and adjusted it. But definitely like try to get more comfortable in InDesign and to make these, because that will help you a lot. But yeah, in terms of like adjusting drawings, I think it was just a matter of like, how do I lay it out on a page together, instead of like going in and like changing colors or like, you know, the actual material itself, but instead like getting it to fit like the page and make it look good. So yeah, it starts with the render, goes to models, and then you're into like, you're kind of in the project now, you get the context, you have like a little bit of an idea of what's happening. And then, so that's actually the end of that project. So it's very like straightforward, really clear, doesn't need like a lot more. I mean, like you get the project, it's a house. So like, I mean, there's nothing really more that you can say. So that's kind of like where I came from. And in terms of like the order of the projects, like I considered this one to be like the best drawn, and like I had really strong drawings, so that's why I started with it. So that's Tetra's house, and then it goes to Urban Dock, which is the summer like design build studio that I was a part of before my last year, which was really fun. And I think it was like a really good part of my portfolio because it shows that I was able to like, you know, collaborate with a group of people to build this like one-to-one stage that was used for like it was like a productive like design. And so I think that was like really strong for the portfolio that I was making. And again, like similarly, like I kind of kept this layout of like having like an image with like the title and like the description. Sorry, there's a few people talking. I hope it's not too loud, but yeah, like you kind of have this image and then like the blurb kind of next to it to like advise the reader to kind of understand how you're kind of framing this project. And so I wanted to talk about, you know, like I'm explaining the context of like the site and like the class itself. And, you know, out of 14 students, my design was chosen because it's true. And so like, if you find moments where you're like, you can kind of dig for like credit in a way, it's like, it's always good to have that. Because then it shows that like, you know, you were like a part of the design rather than just like, you know, building this thing with like 14 other people. So that was something that I feel like is important and sometimes can be overlooked. But yeah, also in terms of like the title and stuff, always make sure you have like the name of the professor you worked with, because you never know, like whoever's reading your portfolio might recognize the name or something, and that could create like some sort of like connection and conversation. So so the next project was Urban Doc. So I have this image and then I have like these drawings. So these drawings I actually ended up making myself. Like this wasn't something that the class made. The two drawings at the top were construction drawings that we used as a class to like build this. And the two on the bottom were drawings that I made because I didn't have drawings for this. It was mostly just images and then those construction drawings. So I knew that we needed to have like real drawings. So that's what I did. And yeah, like kind of taking the model that we made and then making, line drawings that match like kind of the aesthetic that I'm going for, which is just like this black and white kind of situation. And it worked out. I mean, like it really like tells a story. Again, like I think a story is really important in general. So yeah, like I said, like trying to show a narrative in a way. And in terms of like this portfolio having a narrative, I don't really have a narrative. I feel like that's something that I've been doing more so now with my GSAPP portfolio because they really encourage that. And I think it's really successful for a lot of people. But in terms of like coming out of undergrad, it's like I said, it's really hard because you have like the prescriptive curriculum. So just keeping that in mind, I think is important. And if you can't like create like a general story, then I think like at least doing it through like your aesthetics and like the way you're representing things. Because if you even think about the section of drawings in the last project, like they're also black and white. And so it's kind of like keeping this theme. It makes it like a little bit cohesive. It's pretty, it's like nice, you don't feel like every project is like this crazy thing, but at the same time, sometimes it's good to have that craziness. So it just depends on like where you're coming from. I feel like my background is pretty traditional architecture, so there wasn't a lot of room for me to just like kind of have this random like like visual like VR thing. So, but I mean, if that's something that you have, definitely like take advantage of it and like really try to like hone in on that. But yeah, so Urban Doc, like that was literally 2 pages. Like, so I have 9 projects is a lot, or 8 projects is a lot. So that's why I think it was a little bit of really short page kind of length, but I think it made it really good because then every image means a lot more and you're trying to like understand the project from just these drawings. So then the next project I have is from Art 280, my tower. I feel like Nick Hoban shows this in his class still. I think Anthony told me that, which is funny, which is great. I mean, cool. I love this tower that I made. It was really sick. I think it turned out really clean. The image is really great too. So I really took advantage of like showing that shape. But I'm pretty sure this is the only page for this project. So again, like something that Inge mentioned too is like you like using white space and like really kind of being like smart about it and like dividing your page up, but then also not losing that general layout and like that cohesion that you're trying to create from this book as a whole. So that was the 3rd project. And again, like if you notice the caption, like I write down like the actual scale, it's 1 to 100 and like the dimensions of that in inches because it's an American portfolio. Just so you remember, don't forget, it's not metric over here if you do apply here. But yeah, so that's the 3rd project. The 4th project is, so this was actually a tech class, a tech studio that I took in my 4th year. Because if you remember, I didn't get into thesis, which meant I didn't have studio in my last year, which I think also answers the question that someone else had in terms of like having time for like building because I didn't take a year off either. I went straight from undergrad to grad. So because I didn't have like the traditional like thesis studio or studio in general, I think it gave me more time. It gave me room in my schedule to like make time for my portfolio that like I would have used for studio, for example, or for thesis. But because I didn't have that like traditional thesis studio, I took this class specifically because I knew it was like a model, like kind of studio structure class. Like I read the syllabus and it made sense. Like, and Tom Basai I think Anthony worked with him and he was really recommended him. And like I said, the way that this class was structured seemed very like studio-esque. Like you have to like, except it was like a big group, like collaborative thing, which is good, honestly, because then we were able to make this like really cool model. And like, it was like a really fun like exploration in like micro housing, which was, I think the course's syllabus was about. And so just like writing down, the thesis of like the story of that project. And then like, again, like having this overall image of the model. So this one, like, it's not just like one image, it's 2. I don't really know how I feel about this layout. It's kind of not fun. I think I added this image on the right because I couldn't figure out a way to put it anywhere else, because in the next page it's kind of busy with like all this like analytical, like technical model grasshopper situation that I kind of was a part of, but also took advantage of my group members' work and used it. But I gave them credit, excuse me. But yeah, one thing from this project that I think is important to like relay to all of you is the idea of like process. And similar to like when you make a model and like you take process photos in that way, if you're making like like for example, this micro housing, like there was a lot of like form finding studies. And if you're ever like making studies or just like, you know, thinking of different modes of like creating something, always like keep that in an archive. Like this like kind of analysis on the left helped us, like this was like our form finding analysis, like what did we end up like coming up with like this like matrix basically of like options. So this was helpful. I feel like grad school like portfolios really benefit from having these kind of like matrices and like process kind of situation. Like I think a lot of the portfolios that I looked to when I was building my own had a lot of like accepted portfolios, like they had a lot of this kind of work. And so I tried to like, in terms of like drawings that I wanted to create for my portfolio, a lot of that was like these process drawings that I guess is ironic because it's not process because I'm making it post process, but it kind of like faking that process. But it's like it was a part of the project, but it, like you make it a drawing for your portfolio because you're not gonna, and maybe it doesn't come up in your like final presentation, like it's not as important, but I think for your portfolio, like that kind of thing is important. So in the same vein, like with the stuff on the right, with like this like shape and like use like what logic did you use, what strategy, what techniques, like using again like using words to describe that, because otherwise if there wasn't anything written here it would just be like a bunch of 3D printed like shells, like it just doesn't make sense. So like being able to like explain that process is important too, so that the people know kind of like if they do want to read it they kind of understand it better, because otherwise that's what I mean about like being meaningful, like being cautious about using words. Make sure you use them when you need to, if it's not like just for your description or whatever. So that was like, so the model, and then you have like the drawings, and that was it. So then the next project is called Infinity Ramp. I think this was like ARC 201. This is like the only thing I have from, besides the tower from second year. And I think because I really like the quality of the work and the drawings that I made, I'm pretty sure this was like the drawings that I made it for my like design stream application, but I hadn't made them like like this was not what I submitted for like my ARC 201 assignment 2, because it was mostly the model. But then the drawings I like went back to my Rhino, and then I again with this idea of process like created this like fold, bend, twist, like showing that like the technique I used to get this like form. So I think like I think if there is a common theme, it would be that, where you're like showing the process, you're showing the form finding, like how did you get to this point. I think that's really important for a portfolio, because it's this whole idea of a story, right? So you always want to be able to like convey that narrative like super like strongly, and then like aesthetically, so that it's clear, and two, it like looks good. So I think that's what's happening here. And in a way, like someone might consider this like a cluttered page, but I think it's organized enough in a way that like the drawings kind of speak to the model. And because I'm just using one page, one spread for this like entire project, it makes sense a little bit, I think, to me at least. And this kind of like little like sketch model that I like put in the corner of the page, like I don't know, it's just fun. Like I think it just shows, you know, again like this idea of process. So I think that was like a big part of this portfolio in general. So I was Infinity Ramp, and the next project is the last one. It's my least favorite one. I put it last, which is actually a bad idea, because you should put one of your better projects last. But this one was like good enough, I think, to be last. Like personally, it's not my favorite, but I think like in terms of a drawing perspective, like it was good enough to be last. Like I don't imagine this being in the middle, because it's so like, it's a residence, you know, it's big, the scale is really big. It just really makes sense in that like progression from like the house to the tower to, you know what I mean? Like if there wasn't, I feel like if I think about it in retrospect, there wasn't a lot of cohesion in terms of like the progression of the projects, but it made sense to me when I was building it, because it was kind of showing my skills in a way. Like I can, you know, make renders and like think about plan and sections. I can also like, you know, build a model, and it's like very beautiful, but I can also build a model in real life, one-to-one scale, people use it. And then, so like, I think if you think about it in that way, it could help you kind of create that progression. But I feel like even shuffling these projects around, like it wouldn't really made that much of a difference. But I think having this last was the better option because again, like I said, it's like just this idea of scale and the amount of drawings that I had. It like kind of changed that. So I have similar like layout, you know, big picture with the thing on the blurb, and then moving on to this like, so I actually made this whole page on the left, like I made it for this portfolio specifically because I, again, like this idea of like process and form finding was really important. And I think I didn't have any of that before making my portfolio. So in order to include it, I had to like create a lot of these drawings. And it was honestly pretty simple, like, you know, just like, again, like this idea of like having options, because you don't like just make a building and it's like, that's all, like there was nothing else you've considered. There's always going to be a lot of studies and like, you know, massings. Like if you do massing studies, like take pictures of those, even if they're like not that great pictures, like at least give yourself room to like Photoshop it, and maybe that can be something that you include. But definitely start thinking about that if you haven't already. Even if it's something like you can dig for, I would recommend doing that. But yeah, you know, this page, it's all right. I'm not the biggest fan. I feel like I could have made the render maybe bigger to like fit that same like aspect ratio of the diagrams. But again, like just showing that idea of like the story of like where you're getting, what you're doing and how you're getting there. And then to the next page, I hate this page, but it's you know, it's showing those drawings. You have the plans, you have the sections, and then kind of like adding also just like this idea of like massing and like the models that I made, and just including all the work that I did, because like although personally I don't like it, I do think it's like it's showcasing my skills and my techniques to in a way that like is good. So I think it's just my own subjective opinion, but I'm sure objectively it's like pretty decent. But you guys can tell me if that's true or not. But yeah, again, like using this idea of words to explain the project further, if that's something that like you weren't able to convey in your like beginning, or you know, it's not something you wanted to bring up in the beginning, but something that you can bring up now that you've kind of explained or showed the whole project as a whole. So that was like mainly all the projects that I included. This next page is like kind of embarrassing, but you know, just like this idea of like experimenting and like having like other work that's not architecture included. Like I think I did have like a film page also in one of them, but I didn't include it in this one. But yeah, just kind of thinking of like I said, I have a traditional architecture background, so it wasn't really easy to find things that weren't architecture, but I think it's important to include that if you have it or are interested in it, and definitely like take advantage of that for your portfolio. So that was like the whole 2019 portfolio. I just wanted to show the Berkeley one because it was so different. Do you guys see this PDF now? Let me see. Wait, this one. So this is like, so this was, this is 9 pages, which is crazy. But this is what it looks like. It's like super cluttered, but I mean, like considering what I had to do, it makes sense. So I only had 3 projects. And so similar thing, like, you know, I had to change the layout just a bit, but it's still square. I kept that kind of design and laying out similar to like how I had the bigger one, but kind of adjusting things to fit. But like, you know, I had this full spread because I think this was really strong, so I kept it. This kind of is like, you know, a little messy, but it's explaining the project enough with the words that I need to like really convey the story of what was happening. And again, like that spread, and this one just like more images, really showcasing like that collective experience we all had building it, and then those drawings. So I think in that way, this like these 3 projects really work in terms of like the drawing plus the model. And I think that's something that is important to show when you're when you're trying to apply to grad school, because that's like literally all you do. You make drawings and you make models. So I think that's how I kind of frame this portfolio. Last thing, it's not about me, it's about you guys. I think you should take advantage of Columbia GSAPP's website. They literally put everyone's portfolios on here. So if you go to the GSAPP website and you go to menu, just go to exhibitions. I'll just do it for you. Oh, do you guys, wait, you don't see this. Do you see the website? Yeah, okay, so you go to menus, and under research, there's like exhibitions, and they have like so many, like every year is listed here since COVID, because the end of year shows weren't able to be in person, but I think they're gonna keep it like an online archive like in the future also. So just recently for 2022, they uploaded the online. So if you click the online, it takes you to this really cool edgy page, love GSAPP. And if you go down to Master of Architecture, it also has like a bunch, like literally every program, like if you're interested in other things. But this is architecture school, so we're going to go to Master of Architecture. And if you just scroll down, so you have like the actual portfolio stuff, like everyone's portfolio that graduated this past year. And all of these portfolios are amazing. Like you can use any of them as like kind of this like foundation of layout or format or whatever, or just like just thinking of, and this idea, just thinking a lot of this idea of like a story and like having a theme, and that being really like, you know, about you and yourself. Like I think that's really important and something that isn't emphasized enough when you have like portfolio workshops. Like maybe I don't know, I just feel like none of these or most of these portfolios don't have their names on them, you know, like there's a title for them. And I think that's something that's important. Like you don't have to have, like, your portfolio doesn't have to be like Zoona Aamir 2020, like it isn't, you know, selected works. Like you don't have to be like that. And I think Inge kind of touched on this, where it's like every portfolio looks the same. And I think like being different is really important. And I think this is already kind of like setting, like this kind of sets you guys up to be different in a way that's like, you know, like build erosion. Like what do you want to do with your degree? Or like what do you want to learn? Is it sustainability? Is it materials? Is it regrowth? Is it repair? Like I think all these portfolios are perfect for you, to anyone to just like use as a resource, and like think of that kind of theme or that common thread. But at the same time, I didn't have that. I didn't really know that, and so until I came here. So I think that's why I'm trying to tell you all now. But yeah, definitely take advantage of the resources that are on. I'm sure like Harvard, GSD, and other schools have similar archives or resources, but I'm unaware, so I don't want to say that. But I mean, definitely look into it if you haven't already, because if this exists, like I'm sure every other school has it. But yeah, I think otherwise that's pretty much it. I hope that's helpful for all of you guys.